So it's been a couple of years since I've made one of these videos, but recently I have been reading a lot on my Kindle and a lot on Kindle Unlimited. So I thought it would be a good idea to touch base and let you guys know everything that I currently have on my Kindle that I have not read. The reason why it may not be a great thing that I'm reading so much on my Kindle is because, you know, I've got a lot of books around me that I really need to read. But occasionally, you know, I want to break out something new, something fresh, something hyped and see what everyone's talking about. And I have been reading from my Kindle more and more. Now, I do just generally read a lot on my Kindle these days because I tend to get ebook copies of a lot of the books that I own from Libby because it's just easier to read on my Kindle, especially if the book that I'm reading on here is a hardback that I own physically. So I currently don't have anything out from Libby because I tend to only search things when I'm planning on reading that book immediately, and then a lot of books obviously are available to borrow right there and then, and I add them straight to my Kindle. But as you guys will have noticed, because obviously I made one of these videos in 2022 and then I made one in 2024, and over all of those years my book reading, collecting, buying habits have all changed significantly, and now, you know, shelf space is limited. So if I am looking at a book that I maybe want to read and I don't necessarily want to buy it physically, I will wait for a 99p ebook deal and load that baby straight onto my Kindle. Now that still is the exception because when I look at books like that, I do genuinely think like, am I going to read this anytime soon? Do I need this on my Kindle right now? And a lot of the times for a lot of books I do say no and I don't end up checking out, but there are a couple of those on here. And then for some reason I always have all 20 slots of my Kindle Unlimited checked out. I think I'm on 19 or 20 at the minute. Okay, so I currently have all 20 KU slots filled, but 2 of those books I've read recently, so I have 2 available for new books. So if you have anything that you would recommend that's currently available on Kindle Unlimited, then let me know, because I got some space. There's a couple of books on here that aren't on KU anymore, but because they were when I downloaded them and I haven't read them yet, I do have a Kindle copy. And also if there's any books that are super hyped that a lot of people are talking about that are available on KU, I will kind of borrow them as a reminder that I would like to read them if I don't have the physical copy to do so. Now, with my Kindle, a lot of the times I do prioritize reading physically or books that I physically own than books that I only own on Kindle because I'm trying to make a dent in my TBR. But recently I have been reading a little bit more from my Kindle, so I've made some space on KU. I've borrowed a bunch more new books from there, which we're going to talk about, but there are actually still quite a few books that are essentially in my KU graveyard where I have probably had some of these on my TBR since that first Kindle TBR video that I made like 4 years ago. So I guess we'll start with those. We'll start with KU in general. I realized recently, I can't remember what I was on, but I was looking through my KU books and I have had Corrupt by Penelope Douglas out on KU for literal years. It is the longest standing book on my KU TBR. I have read Punk 57 and Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, and I loved both of them. Corrupt is the first book in the Devil's Night series, which I've heard a lot of good things about. This one is a dark romance. I think the relationship is actually between the girl and her boyfriend's older brother, which feels a lot like Birthday Girl, if I'm being honest, although in Birthday Girl specifically there was no cheating. Not sure about this one. The male main character has a score to settle with the female main character because a few years prior to when the book takes place, she put some of his friends in prison, and I think it's like a revenge bully kind of romance. Weirdly, even though I don't really like dark romance and don't really read it, I have enjoyed what I've read from Penelope Douglas in the past, and so this is one that I do at some point want to get to. When I was talking about books that I have that are no longer available on KU, the one that specifically came to mind was When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker, which I have had on here from probably around the time that it was traditionally published, or maybe just before. It would actually be a really good time to read this. Now, I do have the physical copy as well because I've got the Locked Library edition, but you know she's so when I read it, I would rather read it on Kindle. I don't actually remember the plot of this one, but I think that the concept of the world is that dragons flew into the sky and curled up and created the moons. I can't remember if that's like where they go to die or if it's more like their dragon eggs. And I think at some point throughout this storyline, they fall from the sky and dragons come back. I did read the first 50 or so pages of this when it was traditionally published because I was going to a Sarah A. Parker sign-in, but I didn't have the time to kind of prioritize it, and those original 50 pages didn't grip me, so I put it down, and I do want to try again at some point. I just haven't circled back around to it, but my physical copy of that is in the stack. back, so theoretically it should come up some point relatively soon. I also have The Throne of Honor and Blood by J. Bree, which is the sequel to Crown of Oaths and Curses, which is a fae witch romance that I read a couple of years ago now, and I actually really enjoyed it, but there were so many problems with the sequel that I've actively been putting it off. I think that the release of it was delayed a couple of times. I know a lot of people were really mad at J. Bree about it, but then I believe when the book was actually released, it was full of errors, typos, and essentially just shouldn't have been published. With self-published books, they do go through revisions from time to time, and those revisions get uploaded to the Kindle document. So I've kind of been waiting for long enough that those revisions have been made, and I'm pretty sure that somebody told me relatively recently that that has happened. So at some point I can get back into this series. At this point though, I probably would have to reread book one, although I'm probably not going to reread the novellas. But this one is a very slow burn enemies to lovers romance where at the end of the first book they still hate each other, but essentially the fae blame the witches for this curse that has been put upon them, and all of their children keep dying, and this has created such an intense hatred between the two races, even though it is just a small section of witches that are responsible. Problem here though is that our two main characters are fated mates, and the fae prince, who is our male main character, has heard a prophecy that when his mate arrives it will help to break the curse upon his people, and when he finds out that his mate is a witch, he responds really badly to this, whereas I'm pretty sure the female main character knows who her mate is, and she fled the country to kind of get away from it, but eventually she had to come back, which throws her into the path of the prince. I also have Between Wrath and Mercy by Jess Wisecup. This one I added on recommendation from another booktuber as one of like the best romances that she'd ever read. The only thing that I know about this one is that it follows an older female protagonist, and I think that she also has a kid. That was interesting enough for me to want to read it. Something a little bit different in the romancy genre is always something that I'm looking for, and I heard good things about this one. Unfortunately, I still have not read House of Striking Oaths by Olivia Wildenstein. This is probably one of the most long-standing books on my TBR because I think it was 2022 or 2023 when I originally discovered this series. I read the first two books in this series so long ago now that I can barely remember the premise of this series, but I'm pretty sure that the first book is called House of Beating Wings, and it's following this girl who, I can't remember if she's human or she's half fae, but she is essentially hated by the fae, but her best friend is the crown prince's brother, and she's like low-key in love with him. She thinks that he's in love with her, and so she embarks upon this quest to find these iron relics because there is a like prophecy that is given to her by an oracle that if she finds these relics then she will be crowned the queen, which she takes to mean that the prince that she loves, who is the younger brother, will ascend to the throne and then marry her and take her with him, but that is not necessarily the case. I feel like going through these and seeing what's still on my TBR and how long they've been here is really gonna give me a push, fingers crossed, to read them, because I also have Flawless by Elsie Silver. I know nothing about this aside from that it's a cowboy romance. I borrowed this on Kindle Unlimited when it was extremely hyped because I wanted to know what the hype was about, and I haven't gotten around to it yet. So it's still here because I'm actually not sure if this series is still on KU, and I do want to maybe read it at some point. With contemporary romance authors, I tend to give their most popular work a try, and if it doesn't work for me then I kind of never revisit them. So Elsie Silver, obviously very popular. Flawless is the book that kind of blew her up, so I do want to dip my toes into that eventually. I also have A Promise of Lies by Claire Sager, which is the third book in the Shadow of the Tenebrous Court series, which when I read book 1 and 2, I read them back to back and I ate them up, but I was waiting a couple of months for book 3, and so when it was released I got it on KU and I never revisited the series, just like I did with the Olivia Wildenstein series. But the first book in this series I think is called The Kiss of Iron, and it is of course a fae story because I love me some fae. This one is following a girl who is married. She was pushed into an arranged marriage, almost a forced marriage, by her family, and her husband is awful. He essentially gambles all of their money and leaves her to try and turn the estate over to make the money to pay off his debts. So one day she is offered this opportunity that could change her life forever to go to the royal court, which she thinks is really weird that she's been invited, and she finds out when she arrives that the reason that she's been invited there is to spy on a fae lord, and the fae lord maybe makes her realize the way that her husband should have been treating her all these years, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. I also have Daisy Hates by Jessa Hastings on here. I read Magnolia Parks in 2022 or 2023 again, and I love how melodramatic that series is. It is given like British Gossip Girl, Chuck and Blair at their most toxic, and the language that Jessa Hastings uses is so dramatic and so heavy with metaphor, and it really threw me back to being a teenager and, you know, being kind of, well, not in love. I thought I was in love at the time, but, you know, kind of infatuated with these like boys that were really just nothing special at all, and all of those really dramatic feelings that you have when you're dealing with that at a very hormonal time of your life. And so it felt like really high stakes, like if this guy doesn't text me back, then I will simply expire, and I really vibed with it. And then I just never continued on with the series. I actually also once again have all of the paperbacks of these as well, and I just got this copy out so that I had an ebook copy. I think that I was traveling somewhere and I thought that it would be good to have it in case I wanted to read it on my travels, and it has just been in my Kindle Unlimited graveyard since then. Everything else we have on here I feel is a little bit more recent, because the next one is Anathema by Kerry Lake. I have had this on KU for a little while. I've since picked up a physical copy from an Evermore event, which is Penguin's romance imprint, but I have heard amazing things about Kerry Lake. I know that she writes like gothic romance, and I believe that they have some spooky or horror elements. I have heard people say that like Anathema and Nocticadia are the best books that they've ever read. Honestly, have never heard a reliable synopsis on any of these books, so I have no idea what the actual plot is, but just the way that people speak about Kerry Lake has me so intrigued. Because it's gothic, I expect it to have a really good atmosphere, and I think Anathema specifically is following a woman who is kind of forced into this really creepy shadowy wood in pursuit of creatures. That is all I know. I kind of want to go into these blind, just riding the good vibes that I've heard from people, and once again, this is in the stack, so I really hope that it comes up soon, because I would really love to read it. I also have The Edge of Madness by Kyla Stone, which is the sequel to The Edge of Collapse. This one is a really weird one for me because it's unlike anything I typically read. It is quite a long series. I'm not sure how many books in total, but it is set in, I think it's Michigan, and there's an EMP during the winter, so it's all snowy, and there's obviously the problems that creates, like the cold weather, the lack of accessibility to some resources because of the snow, and there is an EMP that knocks all of the technology out, and somewhere way off in the woods in a cabin, it knocks out the electricity on the cell of a woman who has been kidnapped, and she's been there for a couple of years now. So she takes this opportunity to escape, and she stumbles across somebody whose like car's broken down in the woods, and he has to help her, and then the person that's kidnapped her is pursuing them as well. Now, this has some content warnings in it because, like I said, this woman's been kidnapped for a while and she is pregnant when she's on the run, so I'm pretty sure that you guys can figure out what that implies. And the books in this series all follow different characters, so I actually did start Edge of Madness when I needed something that was kind of not low stakes, because you know it's pretty intense, but something that required less investment than is typical on my part. And the second book follows the woman who was kidnapped's husband and their son, and where they were when the EMP happened. And I believe that all of these interconnected stories are going to come together. I think one of the books as well follows the guy that the woman is on the run with, and maybe we'll get a kidnapper book. That could be interesting. Along the same lines as Anathema, I also have In the Veins of the Drowning by Kaylee Cassidy. This was one that was hyped, I think it was last year, and I have also heard that it's dark, atmospheric, gothic, which is what really drew me to this one. I think that this one in particular, though, is following a siren who has been kind of ostracized because of what she is, and to defeat whatever obstacle it is in the plot of this, she has to embrace that side of herself, like the monstrous side of herself. This is one that I picked up mainly based on the fact that people have described it as like dark and atmospheric, and you know that I'm always here for that. I also have Of Darkness and Light by Ryan Carhill. This one is the second book in the Bound and the Broken series, which is an epic fantasy series. It is currently being traditionally published by The Broken Binding, but all of the books are also available on KU. So as of now, I've read book one and I've read the first novella. The first novella in this series I gave 5 stars to. Phenomenal. The first book I gave like like a 3.5 because I saw potential, but I wasn't 100% sold. The novella blew me away. I was obsessed. So I'm really excited to get back into this series. It just takes me a little while to prioritize epic fantasy because I have an epic fantasy book club. So I'm always kind of working on something and I want to dedicate the time to keep showing up and like reading installments in epic fantasy because it's so easy to lose track. But this one is very classic fantasy in nature. It has a lot of throwbacks to things like Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time. It has a lot of like John Gwynne comparisons there as well. And it's following a young man who is embarking upon this like long night situation, which is what it's called in The Faithful and the Fallen. But it's essentially, is it called the Proven? It's the test that will allow him to transcend from a boy to a man within his community. And shortly after this, he stumbles into a group of people who are tied to a plot to overthrow the government, because way back in the history of this world, there used to be races like giants, elves, dwarves, all living in harmony, and they formed the Order. However, they were overthrown by the Empire, which currently has an iron grip on the country, and our main character ends up accidentally embroiled within this plot line to overthrow the Empire with the Order, with the catalyst for his involvement involving a dragon egg. I also have Kissed by the Gods by Katie Rogan. So this is one that is about to be traditionally published. I think at the time that you're watching this, it's going to be tradpubbed next week. And I actually received an ARC of this one from Glank, so thank you so much to Glanks. But what I didn't realize is that the books were still available on KU. So as soon as I figured that out, I downloaded that baby. And this one is the first book in a romantasy series that I've heard really good things about, especially regarding like the magic and the world building. So this one is set in a world that is ruled by gods, and the gods are taking boys to mine for something. I do not know what they are mining, but it's like this mandatory conscription kind of thing, I think. And when the soldiers come for our main character's little brother, she kills them all, and she thinks that she's going to be killed for this, but she's actually taken by a god-touched warrior and blessed by a goddess, which makes her this really covetable figure in this world because she's received like this divine blessing. The next one I don't know very much about at all. I'm trying to go into it semi-blind, but it is one that received a lot of hype earlier this year, and that is Daggermouth by H.M. Wolf. Now this one is once again being traditionally published very soon. I think it's in a couple of months, and I'm not sure if it's still available on KU, but I did manage to snag it before they took it off, if it has been. And all I know about this one is that it is a dystopian romance, and for a couple of weeks there before it was picked up by a traditional publisher, the girlies were losing their minds over it. Now I was not a huge fan of dystopian back in the day. I read the hits. I've read Divergent, The Hunger Games, The Fifth Wave, but it was, is The Fifth Wave sci-fi or is it dystopian? It was definitely released during the dystopian boom. I've also read Maze Runner. Didn't like that one very much, and it's definitely not my favorite subgenre. And now I'm noticing that dystopian romance is having a bit of a moment, and I haven't read any of those newer books yet, so I really don't know how I'm gonna feel about it, but I want to know what the deal is with Daggermouth and why everyone loves it so much. So I recently read and fell in love with Shield of Sparrows by Devney Perry. It was one of my favorite books of last year, and the sequel, Rights of the Starling, is currently my favorite book of this year. And those books were Devney Perry's first foray into romantasy. Traditionally, Devney Perry is a contemporary writer, and she writes a lot of romantic suspense. So I've had my eye on the Indigo Ridge series from her, but it's not on KU, and I think that they're recovering them very soon, and I like those covers a lot more than the ones that currently exist. So I'm biding my time on that one. But what is available on KU is Bluebird Gold. I went onto Devney Perry's website and it tells you like all of the different series, the reading orders, if there is any. I'm not sure if there is with Devney Perry, and also what subgenre they are. And I'm pretty sure that Bluebird Gold is the first in a new series, and it is definitely romantic suspense. Now, romantic suspense is something I've thought that I would enjoy for a long time, but I recently read Across the Vanishing Sky by Catherine Cowles and really loved that. So romantic suspense from Devney Perry, I am very excited to get to. I did not look too much into the plot of this one because with things like thrillers, suspense, I generally don't really need to know too much about them, but also I'm going off the author and the subgenre here more more than anything else. But what I can tell you is that it's set in the 1980s, which aesthetically, one of my favorite decades. Music, impeccable. Fashion, impeccable. While we are on the subject of suspense novels, I also have The Housemaid's Secret by Freida McFadden. I read The Boyfriend by Freida McFadden last year and it was one of my 5-star reads of the year. I love the plot twist. Like, the shock factor was amazing. And because the movie of The Housemaid was released this year, I wanted to read that, which I did a couple of months ago. Enjoyed it, but not as much as The Boyfriend. But the great thing about Freida McFadden is all of her books are on KU. And when I read a book by an author or a book in a series, I like to replace it with the sequel or the next book I'd like to read from that author as a placeholder. So right now we have The Housemaid's Secret out. Now, I am aware that the general consensus on the Housemaid series is that book 1 is the best and the rest of them aren't as good. So I'm going in with that knowledge. I'm not expecting it to be the best Freida McFadden book I've ever read. But you know, thrillers for me, I don't read them critically. I read them purely for entertainment. And even when I'm feeling down, you know, I'm not opposed to reading something a little murdery to perk me up. So I'm not too pressed that it's not amazing. And if I end up not liking it, I just won't read the third book. But The Housemaid is following a young woman who's just been released from prison, but we have no idea why. And she is quite young. I think she's been in prison for maybe about 10 years. So something serious has clearly gone on. But she's on parole and she's looking for a job. So she goes to interview for this nanny position at this rich family's house. And she doesn't think she's going to get it because they're going to run a background check. They're going to find out who she is. But lo and behold, she is employed and she is given the attic room to sleep in, which in comparison to the rest of the house, it's a little bare, a little sparse, a little creepy. And shortly after she starts working for this family, she realizes that the lady of the house is a little odd. She's behaving a little erratically and very out of character in comparison to how she was behaving in her interview. And weirdly, her husband, who is this gorgeous, handsome, well-to-do gentleman, is very patient with his wife, very understanding, and our main character does not think that's quite fair. I also have Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole, which is the first book in the Kindred's Curse saga. I know that there has been a lot of back and forth with the release date of the final book or books in this series, so I've been waiting until it's finished, which it will be in a few months, I think. And this is the series that has been selected for my Patreon book club for the remainder of the year. So we're going to be reading Spark of the Everflame in June and then reading one book every 2 months from July through to the end of the year. Now is a great time for me to jump on this series. I've heard phenomenal things about it, but that can go either way with me. But I really hope that I love this one because the hype is like pretty real on this. All I know about this one is that it is set in a world that is ruled over by the children of the gods. I think they're called like the Descendants or the Descended. And our main character lives in this secluded village. Her mother disappears somehow and she discovers something about her mother's past that she didn't know. And this throws her into the world of the gods, into the world of the Descended Descendants. And there she comes under the scrutiny of, I think, the king's son. Sounds like a pretty standard romancy setup, but you know, if it's executed well, I'm gonna eat that up. And then the last book that I have out from KU is a very recent edition. It is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston, because I have only heard amazing things about Ashley Poston's romance, and I think that this one is her highest rated. I think it might be one of the only ones available on KU as well, but I completely did not add 2 and 2 together because I've been on this platform for a really long time, and I remember way back when I started my channel there was a book called Geekerella that was super popular, and it's like YA contemporary, so very much not my thing. And it's only recently when I was discussing Ashley Poston with my patrons that I realized that Ashley Poston from Geekerella is the same Ashley Poston that I'm now more familiar with as being popular in the romance space. And also, I have a book right there that I've been thinking of unhauling because I'm not sure it's for me. Once again, by Ashley Poston. It's Among the Beast and Briars, if you care. I have decided that I would like to read The Dead Romantics because I don't think that Ashley Poston's fantasy is for me. I think that she also wrote a series that was very popular back when I started BookTube called like Heart of Iron or something, which was a sci-fi, which at the time I would have loved to have read. Now, absolutely will not be picking that one up. But I would love to try some of Ashley Poston's romance. So like a novel love story, 7 Year Slip. I think she has like a garden related one coming out this year. But the one that I've got out on KU right now is The Dead Romantics, which I did not realize until I read the synopsis this had a little bit of a supernatural twist to it, because our main character in this one, ironically enough, is a ghostwriter, and her editor, who's a bit grumpy, a bit surly, refuses to give her an extension on her deadline, and shortly after that she receives a call that she has to return home because her father has passed away. And so when she returns home, this is a town that she left very intentionally. She doesn't feel like it's home anymore, but when she returns she feels like she's missed a lot about it, and one day she opens the door to her family's funeral parlor and she finds her editor stood on the doorstep, which would be weird in any circumstances for our main character, but it's even weirder because he's actually dead and she has to deal with his unfinished business to lay him to rest. Now, the thing that really intrigues me about this is that it's romantic, and I don't foresee a happy ending with a human and a ghost. And you know me, I love things that are romantic but don't necessarily follow the conventions of the romance genre, so don't necessarily end in a happily ever after. If they end in tragedy, if I'm going to be sobbing at the end of them, honestly, 10 times better than a romance for me most of the time. Moving on from Kindle Unlimited, I genuinely only think I have a handful of things that I've paid for, and all of these are 99p Kindle deals. I do want to give a special shout out to Red Rising, because recently I managed to pick up the entire series at 99p per book, and you know this is my favorite series of all time, so having it portable where I can just dip in and out and get deep in my feels is so appealing to me, and I'm so glad that I managed to score that deal. Something that I will do from time to time quite frequently is if I see like an epic fantasy book on there that maybe I've read and there's a high likelihood that at some point I will revisit that book, I do sometimes get the Kindle deal on that if it's on 99p deals, because it's more convenient for me to read it on my Kindle. Things like the Stormlight Archive are books that I've picked up in that way. And you know, aside from that, I think there's only 2 books here worth mentioning, because there's some stuff on here that's super old. Like I picked some stuff up on like Stuff Your Kindle Day. I have a book here called Branded. It's the first book in the Fall of Angels trilogy. Doubt I'll ever read that. I have some cozy like witchy mystery books like The Grimm Files, It's a Charmed Life, and Wisteria Witches, which is the first book in the Wisteria Witches series. Doubt I'll ever read that. But the 2 books that I have that are definitely worth mentioning, I actually picked these up recently because they're 2 books that I've heard really good things about, and I am genuinely very good at impulse control when I want a book. I think I want to read that, and then I think, am I going to read it anytime soon? Probably not. And then I think, am I going to have any space to put it anywhere? Probably not. And I don't pick it up. Now sometimes I do still buy books, but generally that is my thought process, and I would say 85% of the time I walk away without buying the book. But these 2 are ones I've heard really good things about that I saw on a 99p deal, so I scooped them up. And speaking of romantic books that are not romances, I picked up The Favourites by Lane Fargo, which I believe is a toxic, dramatic, messy Wuthering Heights retelling featuring ice skaters. I think they're figure skaters. I'm here for it. I'm so here for it. I want to read this so bad. And then the last one is a fantasy book that I've heard amazing things about by an author I've heard amazing things about, and that is Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang. Now I do own The Sword of Kaigan, and because I own The Sword of Kaigan in a physical copy, I will not buy Blood Over Brighthaven until I've decided how I feel about that. But I could not resist this little deal. So I actually do not know too much about this. It was on a ton of people's best books of the year list last year though, and a fantasy book that is like so well regarded, I need to know about. I know that it concerns mages, and I know that it concerns a character who has worked her hardest to climb the ranks of the mages to become a high mage, and when she achieves that position she finds out a bunch of people don't want her there, and they do things like they give her a janitor as an assistant instead of an actual assistant, but it turns out that the janitor was actually somebody really well regarded as well, and that's it. That's all I know about it, but the esteem of this book is what has really drawn me to it. I'm pretty sure that that is the extent of what I currently have on my Kindle. Let me know if you have any recommendations for me to fill those final 2 empty slots I currently have on KU. I currently have The Score in there, which is the 3rd book in the Off-Campus series, but they've taken the Off-Campus series off, so I can't replace it with book 4, which I think is called The Goal, and it's John Tucker's book. And I also have Shadow and Storms, I think is the right way around for that title, by Helen Shorer, which is the final book for the current iteration of my Patreon book club that I've just read. So I need something to fill those gaps. Also, let me know if there's any of these you think I should prioritize, because like I said, I tend to forget a lot about the books on on my Kindle, or I prioritize physical reads over them. Sometimes I feel like I should do like an ebook reading vlog, but then I think about how that's going to take away from the time reading my actual TBR and I get a little antsy. So yeah, let me know if there's any of these you think that I should prioritize that I will really enjoy. And if you guys would like to let me know you are here but you don't feel like you have anything to say, leave me a cloud emoji to represent the place where all of these books are actually stored. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, my Instagram, my Patreon, my TikTok if you want to follow me on any of those. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.